From the very beginning, everything was normal and life flourished on the planet, until a powerful flash and explosion occurred. As a result, strong radiation was generated, affecting most of the population. This day was named the Day of the Beginning because many innocent people died. People received a lethal dose of radiation, but some of them did not understand the full danger. Wars began, people killed each other for resources and survival. And suddenly, something happened that no one expected. A virus broke out, infecting many people. And one day, heavy rain began to fall. It was after this that the first cases of infection with an unknown virus occurred. The population began to die out. Cities were abandoned and turned into ruins. The end of the world had come, and there was only death around. But the main character promised himself to survive no matter what. When it all happened, the news channels talked about the deadly effects of radiation. But the government assured people that soon everything would be normal, so no one was afraid. People lived as before, but soldiers began to appear more and more often on the streets. One of the soldiers was a commander who carried out government orders and monitored the situation in the city. It was a holiday that day, so he gathered all his subordinates. So he went to a local store, intending to cover all the expenses and treat his comrades. The man was very polite and let the woman pass him as she was leaving the store. He also warned her that the streets were very crowded. Therefore, she and her child should be careful. After that, he went inside the store. The man was a good soldier and served his country, so he had no time to deal with personal problems. He and his commander almost got into a fight in the store. The guy who worked there was very surprised when he saw the soldiers. The soldiers said that a special operation had been in preparation for a whole year, but just before it was about to start, everything changed. When the operation was canceled, everyone started talking about how the war had never started. Therefore, this order saved many lives. The government had a deadly weapon that could change life on the entire planet. This weapon could kill all living things on the planet. Suddenly, a heavy downpour began. No one expected that the rain would be the beginning of the end. Moreover, they believed that the weather would soon change and it would be a sunny day again. But that was not the case. The rain did not stop and only got stronger. One of the men felt very ill. He sensed that something was wrong. His eyes hurt very badly and he could hardly see anything. The poor soldier could not understand what was happening. There was a terrible wound on his face. Meanwhile, the men in the store did not suspect anything. They wanted to pay for their purchases, but realized that something was wrong. It seemed that their colleagues had started fighting. Therefore, one of them was about to go outside to calm them down. He hurried to go outside, but did not make it in time. A woman was standing at the front door trying to get inside. The captain didn't suspect anything, so he let her in. And then he saw what had happened to her face. It was covered in strange wounds. The woman rushed at him. She was screaming in pain and from what had happened to her face. The man held her in his arms, trying to understand what had happened. But suddenly, she attacked him and tried to bite him. The girl, with incredible strength, knocked him to the ground and began to bite him. The main character wanted to help him and try to save him from the mad woman. The guy grabbed the woman and tried to pull her away from his partner by force. He threw her out onto the street and was about to help him, but then he saw how badly her body and face had mutated. He understood that something was definitely wrong with her. What was happening? Why had she become so rabid? At that moment, he realized that other people had also been infected. They began to attack him again and try to bite him. But at the last moment, he managed to close the door. He tried to hold the door shut, but he could feel that the mutants were very strong. The boy ordered the employee to lock all the doors and block the entrance. After all, if the mutants managed to break through, they would have no chance of survival. The infected began to surround the store. They were everywhere. The hero continued to hold the door and waited for the guy to lock it remotely. But soon, he would no longer be able to hold on. The metal curtain finally began to descend. Now they could finally feel safe. The frightened store employee couldn't understand what had happened. The main character hoped that they wouldn't be able to get inside, but he didn't dare move away from the door. He realized that the problem was the rain, because the people who got caught in it went crazy. Until the rain stopped, they had to wait inside. He wanted to help his friend, but it was too late, because the captain had turned into a monster and was preparing to attack them. At the last moment, he managed to notice this and try to protect himself. He tried to shout to his partner, but he didn't listen to him and continued to attack. The employee was scared and didn't want to touch the zombie. He hid behind the cash register and didn't dare to help him. The main character continued to resist and did everything possible to avoid being bitten. The store employee did not want to die, so he tried to leave the store through the back exit. But he did not even notice the zombie approaching him from behind. He realized that someone was behind him, so he tried with all his might to open the door, which was blocked. And then, when he saw his director, who was also already infected, the main character heard his voice and realized that he was dead. Moreover, he felt that the mutant was very strong and would easily defeat him. He definitely didn't have enough strength to win. At that moment, when he saw the outlet, he realized that it was his last hope. Without thinking, he was about to strike. He pressed the socket against his body and hoped it would work. Suddenly, there was a strong electric shock. It was very painful, but he managed to free himself from the mutant. Now, seizing the moment, he struck and managed to push him away. After that, he got to his feet and headed toward the refrigerator. The guy was going to crush the zombie and pin him down with the heavy refrigerator, but nothing worked. In a panic, he tried to turn it around, but saw that the mutant was starting to get up. There was no time left, so he threw it right at the captain. It worked, because now the mutant was pinned to the ground. The hero couldn't believe that everything was really happening, but he definitely didn't want to die. His former friend started screaming, but couldn't free himself. The refrigerator was very heavy, so he didn't stand a chance. He was going to call management to find out what was really going on. But now, there was no connection in the city. The guy didn't understand what was happening and hoped that the rain would stop soon. But he hoped that it was safe in the store. There was plenty of food and everything necessary to hold out for a few days. He managed to find cigarettes and food, which he was going to take with him. While he was inside, he believed that he would be safe. But suddenly, when he saw a terrible sight. In addition, when he heard a loud child's cry, he understood what was happening. On the street, the boy saw dozens of infected people, and they all heard the same thing he did. It was the cry of a child left alone on the street, surrounded by zombies. It was the same child he had seen a few minutes ago. 17 years had passed since the beginning of the apocalypse, and by this time, all cities had been destroyed. Everything was infected. There was no safe place left on Earth where there were no mutants. Now, people had to fight for their own survival and risk their lives every day. The main character survived. That day, he did not abandon the baby and ran out into the street to save him. Then, he managed to escape and run to his own car. And now, he has told this story many times to anyone who wanted to hear it. Even though the girl had heard this story before, she wanted to hear all the details. In addition, she drew the main character, and it reminded him of himself in the past, when he was young. In the drawing, he was with a child, running away from the mutants who were chasing him. He let the girl draw and promised to get new paper when this one ran out. It was her favorite part of the story, so the girl asked him not to stop. But the man was tired of telling the same thing over and over again. At that moment, he saw that his boy, Abu, had managed to return. Ken was also very happy to see him. People had to live in tunnels and sewers. But there was another threat there. Thousands of hungry rats that could tear a person to pieces. People had to be very careful because rats had good hearing. And if they heard them, they would immediately eat them alive. In order to move through the tunnels, they had to use bait to distract the rats. Abu was the one who made the bait from waste and garbage. The boy had long understood that rats had a good sense of smell, so they could smell the bait even from a great distance. Now, it was necessary to prepare for the next equally important step. They had to try to get out of the sewer alive. Junxiao had to prepare other baits that were necessary. In order to collect them, he had to hunt zombies for a whole month and extract waste from their bodies. It was also bait for rats, but much stronger. It was supposed to force them to take a different path, to their own nests. But soon, they would return to this very place, so they had to hurry. When everything was ready, they were about to move on. They tried to search the tunnel and find valuable things. Ahead was a narrow passage that no one could reach. There was a lot of debris and corpses underfoot. With each step, it became more dangerous. But the people did not stop and continued to move forward. They could not relax because there were also many rats in the burrow. Suddenly, they found a human corpse that had been lying there for many months. It was the remains of a man from a pharmaceutical company. The dead man was sent to clear the tunnel, which was full of hungry monsters. Abu began to search his body, trying to find something useful. Suddenly, he heard a squeak and realized that there were hungry rats next to him. One of them managed to jump on his hand and tried to bite the boy. However, suddenly a shot rang out. The girl saved him from a serious injury. She always remained cautious, even next to a corpse. If the mouse had bitten him, all the people around him would have been in danger. She ordered him to get up and be much more careful in the future. The other men noticed that the girl was trying to protect the boy. Now, they tried to find a way out and moved in the direction where the rats were constantly running. Ahead was a metal mesh that they tried to open. To do this, they used a key, because they did not want to lift anything. After a while, everything was ready, and all the bolts were unscrewed. They carefully knocked out the metal cage. They were able to get into another tunnel building, where there were huge mechanisms. They had never seen anything like this before, and did not know what it really was. They seemed to be impressed by the scale of this structure. So right in front of them was an unfinished subway station. Now they would be able to find many different mechanisms and devices. The metal parts could be melted down and turned into metal. So we started to dismantle everything we could take with us. We couldn't forget about the crisis, which would soon return and find us. The girl was going to work on useful tools while the others dismantled the wiring. It was very dark in the room, so we had to turn on our flashlights. Suddenly, the boy called Wang Shu over to him. He wanted to show her something she hadn't seen in a long time. Through the tunnel, you could see the night sky, which was full of stars. For the first time in his life, he saw them with his own eyes. They glowed and burned brightly. Wang Shu couldn't hold back and just burst into tears. After spending so much time in the tunnels, she had forgotten what the night sky looked like. The boy was amazed. He couldn't believe that stars could be so bright. Now he understood that Wang Shu was older than him because she had seen the sky before. Suddenly, the boy noticed the danger approaching them. To save the girl, he grabbed her and pushed her away. After all, a hungry rat was about to attack her and could easily bite her. But where did they come from in this place? Moreover, there were too many of them there, so they had to run away and save their lives. Crossy decided to return and managed to get inside through the surface. They managed to find a way to get inside, so people started to run away. The hero tried to hold them back while Wang Shu told the others that they needed to run away. He took out the gas cylinder that he always carried with him. It was known that rats were very afraid of fire. Therefore, it was the most effective weapon against a large crowd of hungry rats. He began to burn them one by one, and they squealed in pain. Everyone realized that the rats had returned much faster than they had thought. No one had time to take the necessary supplies because there were many valuable things left in the tunnel. But now, they had to run away to save their own lives. Junsao didn't want to run away because there were many things inside that could be sold. Meanwhile, the boy continued to burn the rats. But he couldn't hold them back for long because the flames would soon go out. He tried to hurry people along. If they didn't get up right now, they would die. Realizing this, people began to run away and tried to leave the tunnel. The boy was going to run last because he couldn't stop burning the mice. His friends tried to crawl into the narrow tunnel behind him. After making sure that everyone had left the room, he hurried to do the same. Behind him were many rats that began to chase him. They were hungry and squeaking. With all their might, they began to run away because their plan had failed. Suddenly, one of them jumped right at him and was about to bite him. Wang Shu tried to protect him, so she took aim. She made an accurate shot and saved his life again. Now there was just a little bit left, and they would finally be able to leave the tunnel. Finally, they managed to get out, but the rats were not far behind them. To delay the rats and break away, Da Sheng wanted to throw a Molotov cocktail. He hoped that it would help and delay the mutants. The flames filled the narrow tunnel and the rats caught fire. They had to run away because it would only stop them for a short time. One bottle was definitely not enough to stop the whole pack. So, without wasting any time, they started running again. But suddenly, the boy noticed that someone was missing. He realized that he hadn't seen Junqiao from the beginning. Most likely the man had stayed in the room because he hadn't even left the tunnel. But how could this have happened? Abu couldn't believe it. Had his friend died? Suddenly, he saw a strange movement in the crowd of mice. It was Abu trying to break free and free himself from the rats. He managed to put on his helmet, but despite this, he couldn't free himself. Despite the huge number of rats that had captured him, there was a chance he could stay alive. No one dared to help him because they didn't want to risk their own lives. Something had to be done urgently, but Da Sheng thought it was all in vain. Abu thought they had to act and do everything possible to try to save him. He couldn't just risk his friend's life like that. But Da Sheng wasn't going to listen to him. He wasn't going to die from rats, so he just packed his things and was about to leave. But suddenly, the hero stopped him. He wanted to get the gas canister that the man had, and he, not wanting to stay in the tunnel any longer, just gave it to him. After that, Da Sheng, like a real coward, just left them and started running away. Now, the two of them were left alone and decided to save their friend at any cost. Abu tried to set fire to the rats and try to free the man. They started burning, and it seemed like he was succeeding. At any cost, he wanted to try to save him and not let him die. Through the flames, everyone began to scatter in different directions. It was the best opportunity to pull him out. So the girl grabbed his hand and tried to lift him up. She succeeded, and now they had to run away. Abu couldn't believe that he had managed to stay alive for so long. The man was lucky because he managed to put on a protective suit that saved his life. Now they had to get back to the quarantine zone as quickly as possible, where it was safe. Finally, in order to definitely stop the mutants, the boy decided to throw his gas cylinder right at them. Very quickly, there was a loud explosion and flames filled the entire tunnel. This was a good opportunity to get away from them. When Da Sheng got to the surface, he tried to sell the things he had found. Moreover, he did not tell anyone in which city he had found such valuable items. But the seller knew that there were other people with him whom he did not see now. Da Sheng was convinced that they were dead, and that no one would ever see them again. Suddenly, inspections began in the city, and people in suits checked everyone. They searched houses and people, and also took their temperatures. It was a mandatory inspection that every resident in the quarantine zone had to undergo. People who were clean were simply let go. The seller ordered all the items to be hidden because the city had been very restless lately, and this could arouse suspicion. Suddenly, the doctors noticed a suspicious man who, upon seeing them, simply began to run away. You tried to examine him, but quickly realized that something was wrong with him. The man looked very similar to a famous person, and he didn't look very well. He tried to escape from the men, but he had little chance of doing so. Meanwhile, the heroes managed to leave the tunnel and escape from their pursuers. Junsao was grateful for his rescue, so he wanted to give away all the things he had. But they saw that something very strange was happening in the tunnel. They noticed the same man who was sick and whom they had tried to shoot. But he denied any guilt and shouted, However, the doctors simply left him no other choice. They had to find out if it was possible to save him. They had to catch him and take him to the quarantine center, where his fate would be decided. Wang Shu understood that they would also be caught if they were seen. After all, there were now a lot of bacteria on their bodies that would definitely not go unnoticed. Everything was clean, and the doctors were about to return. Juntao watched them closely, because Abu's father was working among the doctors. However, Abu couldn't believe that his father could really be cooperating with them. But suddenly, he saw something terrible. A heavy part fell to the ground, making a lot of noise. As it turned out, Junchao's briefcase was torn, so everything started falling out of it. Now they were in real danger because it made a lot of noise. The men immediately heard the strange noise and turned their attention to it. Juntao realized that now they were doomed and in real danger. A decision had to be made, so he left his cover and ran straight at the enemy. Abu couldn't believe that the man had dared to take such a desperate step. He wanted to run with him to try to save him. But Wang Shu's girlfriend stopped him and told him to sit quietly. They caught him and wanted to force him to give them his samples. However, Junchao resisted and tried to hit one of them. He managed to grab the scientist by the arm and throw him to the ground. Now he held a screwdriver to his face. He was ready to kill him if the others tried to approach and grab him. Junchao didn't want them to touch him, and he was ready to kill the man if necessary. But he knew that after that, he would have no chance of staying alive, because they would simply kill him. Suddenly, his victim grabbed his hands and tried to fight him off. The scientist could not accept that his life would end at the hands of such a despicable man. Juntao tried to fight him, and did not notice how others began to surround him. A strong blow to the head knocked him off balance. Now Juntao was on the ground. They began to beat him severely and were going to send him to a special camp for offenders. The chief scientist was ready to joke with his friend's life. The main character and the girl watched everything that was happening. They understood that scientists could not be trusted because they did not care about other people's lives. They beat Junchao so badly that if it continued, he would simply die. But it was clear that this time, they would not be able to save him and help him. However, Abu did not want to listen to her and ran to save his friend. It was very risky because he knew that he would be killed immediately. He hit the man with all his strength, and the man, not understanding anything, fell to the ground. Therefore, he was not going to stop because he wanted to beat the others. With a strong and accurate blow, he managed to break the protective suit. All the while, he tried to shout to Junchao, so that he would get up and try to help him. Junchao was alive, but now they didn't know what to do or how to save themselves. The leader, who had been wounded, was very angry and wanted to kill them. Now, the boy had become a new target for him, and he would not rest until he punished him. They wanted to ask them questions and began to threaten them with weapons, promising to shoot them. As it turned out, the scientist had weapons all along. He was going to shoot and intended to kill the boy if he tried to resist. However, Abu was not afraid. He offered to fight him one-on-one, but immediately received a strong blow to the head. Abu fell to the ground and the men began to mock him. None of them dared to accept his offer because they had weapons. They were going to tie them up and return. Finally, they decided to search the station again, but Wang Shu managed to hide from them and find a safe place. Meanwhile, Qin was in the hospital. She was undergoing mandatory medical examinations for the entire population. It was necessary to give blood and other tests every month in order to curb the spread of the disease. Abu's father always accompanied his daughter. She was very weak and lost consciousness every time they took her blood. He was going to leave her in the hospital so that she could regain her strength. Therefore, he left her in the ward so that she could rest and regain her strength. In addition, the girl had to have blood transfusions very often, which frightened him greatly. After all, it was a huge risk that could kill the girl. Moreover, she could not go to the department for better treatment, because it was very dangerous outside and there were no people who could take her there. Everyone who worked at the hospital tried their best to help others, but there were not enough of them, and very few people received this help. Suddenly, the girl regained consciousness and could not believe her eyes. She saw Abu, who, along with other men, had been brought to them at the hospital. They were treated very cruelly, and the men seemed aggressive. Now they were ordered to stop. And it became clear that they had come to the same place. It was a hospital, which was also a prison, and a place where terrible experiments were conducted. Suddenly, a strange man began to laugh. He was happy that he had finally achieved his goal and gotten to this place. It was necessary to stay away from this guy, because he seemed to be abnormal. Qin wanted to go down and talk to the guy. She called her father so that he could see what these thugs were going to do to them. But when he saw his own son in the crowd, he couldn't believe his eyes. They were going to shoot them, but before that, they wanted to check them with a special detector. When everything was ready, they were going to put them in a special chamber. They had to wait a while before they were sent for disinfection. Only after that would they be allowed to leave. The scientist completely ignored the fact that they were healthy and showed no signs of infection. He wanted to keep people in the chamber as long as possible and mock them. After a while, they were to become test subjects on whom new vaccines for treating the infection would be tested. The scientists did not care about the lives of innocent people and did whatever they wanted. The man who had been in the cell the longest talked about terrible crimes and experiments, but a strange boy sat on the ground and talked to himself. He smiled and promised to save everyone, to free them from suffering. He waited for the light that was to appear after a while. His words frightened the others so much that they were going to call security. The boy with white hair panicked because it seemed that he understood what was about to happen. He begged to be let out and not to be left next to that boy. But no one was going to listen to him. They ordered him to move away and stay away from the door. And when the man did not obey, they hit him on the head with all their might. From the strong blow, he fell to the floor and began to bleed. Everyone was warned that they had to sit quietly, or they would face the same punishment. Other people were brought into the cell, who were also to become future test subjects. The blow was so strong that his nose was broken, and he began to choke on his own blood. But suddenly they noticed that the strange boy had begun to put his plan into action. The guards noticed the same thing and were very frightened. They saw him begin to take out a special substance that was inside his body. It was a test tube with an unknown substance. He managed to bring it unnoticed inside the hospital. No one could understand what was happening and what the boy really wanted to do. But when he started to open the test tube, they had to try to stop him as quickly as possible. Then everyone realized that he was holding infected water in his hands, and now he was going to pour it on himself in order to become a mutant. All the people who were in the same cell with him understood this, but none of them dared to approach him and try to stop him. As a result, he poured the water directly into his eyes. Junsao wanted to try to stop him, but he didn't have time. It was already too late, and after a while, the man's body would begin to mutate, and he would turn into a mutant. He was still alive and laughing at the people who were now in mortal danger. It was the end. Now, it was impossible to save him. A few seconds later, terrible things began to happen to his body. Very quickly, he began to turn into a terrifying mutant, and terrible tentacles appeared from his eyes and mouth. Now he was completely transformed into a dangerous mutant. It was necessary to stay away from him. But the zombie rushed at the wounded boy. He began to bite him and tried to tear him to pieces. Abu managed to pull his friend away and saved his life again. Now, they had to leave the cell, but the guards locked the people inside. Now they couldn't leave the cell and were in even greater danger. The hero tried to shout to the guard to persuade them to open the door to save them. Meanwhile, he saw more and more people dying in his cell, and soon he would be next. But the scientists were in no hurry to open the door and were preparing to open fire on the infected. But if they couldn't contain and destroy the mutants, they would have to kill all the people. And now, they also began to shoot innocent people and kill them all. The hero understood that this was the end. He managed to hide behind a wall, but he couldn't just die like that. The scientist wanted to shoot them to ease their suffering. But no one wanted to leave their shelter and die from bullets. Meanwhile, the mutant was about to attack again and choose a new victim. His victim also began to mutate and would soon turn into a zombie. Now they were coming. Something had to be done urgently. Junsao tried to fight and stopped one of the attackers. The boys tried to fight them and hold out for a while. Abu understood that this was his chance to strike. So, taking advantage of this, he rushed to the door. He managed to grab one of the guards by the leg. Now, he threw him to the ground and began to pull him closer to the cell door. He tied his leg to his hand. In this way, he did not want the man to shoot him and escape. The scientist tried to scare him and pointed the barrel of his machine gun at his head. He threatened to kill him if he didn't let go of his leg. But the guy didn't even listen to him. And it was clear that if he killed him, he wouldn't be able to pull his leg out. Therefore, he had to make concessions and listen to the boy. He wanted the man to open the door and let the people who were inside out. Well, there was no time, so he just gave him the keys to the lock. In addition, he threw away his weapon, the camera. Now the boy understood that he had to act. Well, he tied him up and tried to open the door in time. He grabbed the key and the weapon lying on the ground. Only he and Junqiao were alive. He wanted to save him and ordered him to bend over so he could shoot. But at that moment, he realized that the man had tricked him. Because there were no bullets, he couldn't shoot. As it turned out, he had removed the magazine from the beginning so that he couldn't escape. Now they began to flee, wishing the boys luck. They were going to evacuate and wanted to isolate this floor so that no one could get out. Abu tried to open the door, but none of the keys fit. Besides, he was in a great hurry. But after a while, he managed to open the door. He tried to shout to his friend that he wanted to take him with him, but when he saw him, he realized that it was no longer possible. Junsao was doomed, as the mutants began to tear his body to pieces. Now he began to cry, knowing that he would not be able to escape. However, before his death, he tried to hold them back and asked for only one thing. Juntao wanted the hero to take care of Wang Shu and protect her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the main character's father and the girls began to descend. They understood that something very strange was happening. In addition, Qin was still feeling very ill, and she had a difficult and lengthy treatment ahead of her. However, she insisted that she had seen the boy being taken into a cell. The man believed her, so he hurried to try to save his son. Suddenly, the alarm went off. Serena announced that there had been a major accident at the hospital, so the man was about to go downstairs to see what had actually happened. There he saw people frantically gathering their belongings. They told him to run while he still had a chance to save himself. Very soon, the entire floor would be isolated because there was a threat that their entire underground city would be destroyed. As he ran away, Abu managed to lock the door behind him. He hoped that this would delay the mutants and give him a chance to escape. But now, the very strong mutants could easily break through the metal fence. Abu realized that he had to hurry because he also risked dying. Therefore, he ran away, leaving his friends whom he could no longer help. He had to hurry to find his other friends and go to a new safe place. After all, he did not know that there was a threat to the entire underground city. Suddenly, he saw that the zombies had managed to break through the metal fence. Now they were outside, and everyone was in real danger. Abu ran away, trying to escape pursuit. Suddenly, he bumped into a man. It was his father, and he was very happy to see him at that moment. The man didn't know why the siren had gone off, but now that he had seen the zombies with his own eyes, he understood everything. But how did the infected end up in the Center for Disease Control? First, they needed to save themselves, and only then talk about what had happened. The man ordered him to go up to the upper level and pick up the doctor and Chin, who were waiting for him. The man stayed behind to try to stop the mutants. Abu finally found them and ordered them to follow him. Uncle Hai continued to shoot at the mutants. He hit one of them right in the head, and it seemed that he was dead. But as it turned out, killing him was not so easy. So even after a direct hit, the zombie got back on his feet and continued to live. The chase continued, and now they were trying to get to the upper level. But as it turned out, the doors were locked. It took some time to try to open it and get a chance at salvation. With all his strength, the hero grabbed the metal handle and tried to open the heavy metal door. But he failed, because the door could only be opened from the other side. The mutants were approaching, so a new plan had to be devised. Hai ordered everyone to run up the hill and look for another door that could be opened. In any case, they had to get out alive no matter what. He managed to wound one of the zombies, and it fell to the ground. Now they had a little time to try to break away from their pursuers. The people started running again, but the mutant quickly got up. The chase continued again. They were lucky because they found another door on the next floor. It could be opened, but it took a lot of time and effort. Now they could go inside the room and try to save themselves. The door opened, and it became clear that they were in the tunnel of the quarantine zone. Hai continued to shoot, while the hero tried to close the door behind him. They were too heavy, but despite this, he did not give up. Suddenly, one of the mutants managed to grab hold of them. In addition, the zombie managed to move inside the room. Abu tried to escape, but he didn't make it, because the mutant grabbed him by his jacket and wouldn't let him go. Hai came to the rescue and would not let him die. But it was his friend, Jun Chao, and so it was very painful to watch his parents kill him. Finally, the door was completely closed. Now the people were safe and had to get out of the hospital and survive. Hai tried to explain that his friend was no longer human and could not be saved. Now they had to warn other people about what had happened in order to try to prevent a catastrophe. Meanwhile, the girls tried to go through the tunnel, but suddenly started screaming in fear. There was a mutant inside, but how did it get there? The girls tried not to make any noise and wanted to slowly turn back. Carefully and very quietly, they tried to close the door behind them so that the zombie couldn't hear them. But unfortunately, they didn't succeed. The zombie was sitting on the ground, gnawing on his own hand out of hunger. When Chin saw this, she started screaming in fear. This was the biggest mistake, because the zombie noticed her and tried to attack. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Abu appeared, wanting to protect the girl and save her life. He began to kick the mutant, trying to stop him. He managed to fend off the first attack, but that was not the end. Hai came after him and started shooting at him, trying to kill him. What they feared most had happened, so now they had to wait. They saw that the underground city had been destroyed, and all the people who had once been there were now dead. The army that had tried to contain the virus had failed to cope with the mutants. In addition, they noticed a strange detail on the wall. There were letters written in blood. They had been left by people before their death to give a sign to those who survived. The girl could not look at what had happened without tears. Now they were trying to get to the main entrance of the disease control center. They believed that there might be weapons or people who had managed to survive there. There were many corpses and bullet marks around them, so there had been a fierce battle here. In addition, they realized that the city had been attacked by people from an enemy organization. The girl had long warned about the threat and the bot that was being prepared. Abu was able to find a special explosive mixture on the ground. Suddenly in the tunnel, they saw a shadow and heard the terrifying sounds of people. It became clear that there were many people still alive here who continued to resist. It was clear that this route was impassable and another way had to be found. Suddenly, people appeared who were trying to fight off the monster's attack. They couldn't break through and now tried to retreat and take up a safe position. But the zombies, who were constantly attacking them, wouldn't let them do so. There were so many mutants that they quickly attacked the people. Even though she was kind, they could prepare themselves seriously. Many people died because the mutants were not so easy to stop. In addition, there were many of them, and they continued to advance. Hai understood that if the disease control center was destroyed, the entire city would fall. The main character suggested escaping to the surface because now it was very dangerous in the tunnels. But this was impossible because all the underground tunnels that led to the surface were blocked. However, he had spent a lot of time in various tunnels and remembered one route that no one had ever used. They had no other choice, so they agreed to take that route. Abu knew that they could leave the quarantine zone through the upper level. It was an unprotected tunnel, so it could be very dangerous there. They were forced to leave the guards behind because there was no way to save them. First of all, they had to think about their own safety and how to save their own lives. But it was also dangerous ahead because there were infected people on the platform. The mutants immediately noticed the people and were about to attack them. Hai hit one of them so that he could break away. Now they had to run in the other direction. The people had to get to the surface as quickly as possible. There was a security gate in their way, and if they passed it, they would be safe. Chin started running uphill, but after a while she realized that the passage was blocked. Because there were also a lot of infected people there, the entire floor was filled with them. Even behind the gate, there were a lot of zombies. The boy understood that they couldn't stop, so they had to take a risk. No one could believe that they would be able to break through. But the zombies began to attack, so there was no time left and they had to find a way out as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Hai found a police shield. Now he was going to break through the crowd of zombies and lead the people behind him. Hai tried to defend himself and shot the mutants that approached him. He moved forward and tried to knock them down so they couldn't surround him. He ordered the others to stay close to him and not fall behind. They started to run, but the mutants below had already heard them and began to catch up. Abu also tried to delay them. So he used his old tactics and the gas cylinders he had found among the soldiers. He stayed behind, but among those who managed to survive was a soldier. He asked not to be left behind and to be rescued. The man tried to catch up with them, but he couldn't break through. Abu was faced with a difficult choice, but he couldn't risk his life to save him. Moreover, he was a soldier of the company because of which he lost his friend and almost died. However, Chin was going to go back and wanted to help the poor guy. The guy stopped her because if she stopped, she would die. Besides, it was impossible to save the man. He was seriously injured and would soon become one of them. Now, the zombies were able to catch up with him, and because the people did not return to save the soldier, he was going to open fire on them. Chin saw and heard the sounds of gunshots. The doctor was wounded in the arm, right before her eyes. The man began to bite and tear his body to pieces. To stop him, the boy turned back. He decided to set fire to the zombies that were approaching and not falling behind them. The man began to die but tried to reach for his weapon to shoot people. But the boy did not let him do it and took his machine gun away. Now he also had a weapon. In order to spare the man from suffering, he decided to give him a quick death. Abu approached him and took aim, preparing to fire. But he had already used that bullet, so the soldier was left to die slowly and in agony. The monster slowly began to tear his body into small pieces. The soldier just screamed and gave the people a chance to get away. The girls did not see Abu next to them, but they hoped that he was all right and would soon be able to catch up with them. The man managed to clear the way to the gate that was right in front of them. However, he did not know if this was the route that would lead them to safety. Suddenly, a zombie appeared behind him, which he did not even notice. To protect himself, he took a precise shot, right in the head. But Abu managed to catch up with them, and he reassured them that this was the path that would lead them to safety. During his lifetime, he had already explored many underground tunnels and knew each one of them. Now, the mutants had begun to break through and would soon catch up with them. They had even managed to bend the heavy metal gates. Now they were getting closer and searching for people by smell. These were mutants that were outside the quarantine zone. Along the way, they saw many human bodies that were also trying to escape. At that moment, he thought of Wang Shu, whom he had not seen for a very long time. The hero hoped that she had managed to escape and was now in a safe place. It was very dark in the tunnel, so he used a fire. They moved closer to the wall so as not to get lost. In addition, there was a lot of debris underfoot, so everyone had to be careful. Suddenly, Chin began to scream in pain. Her leg was stuck between the rails, so she couldn't move. The girl sat on the ground and tried to free herself, but to no avail. As a result, her leg was badly injured and it was unclear whether she would be able to continue running. Abu didn't understand what was happening and wanted her to get up and keep running. The doctor tried to help her and calm her down, but Chin was in too much pain. And besides, the zombies were catching up with them. Now they were only a few meters away, and if nothing was done, they would die. The boys understood that they had to defend themselves. They were going to cover their friends and try to fight back. Abu was lucky to find weapons and ammunition, so he opened fire on the mutants approaching him. However, there were so many mutants that even with their combined efforts, they couldn't stop them. They had to hold on and protect the girls, but nothing worked, and soon they would be surrounded. Chin tried with all her might to free herself, but ordered everyone to run away and leave her behind. Now the doctor wanted to act much more decisively. She began to pull her leg with force, despite the intense pain. She had a terrible and very painful wound. Hin couldn't walk at all, so now she needed help. Nevertheless, they began to flee, and the hero stayed behind to try to delay the mutants for a while. However, now he realized that it was the end. He had no ammunition left, so now he couldn't defend himself. After a while, the infected caught up with them again, and one of them almost wounded Chin. Now he was very close to the girl. Hai realized that he would not be able to save her, and the hero realized that he also had no ammunition to fire a shot. To stop the mutant, the doctor put her own hand out. Without thinking twice, the zombie began to bite her, and now she had lost the fingers on her own hand. It became clear to everyone that now she could not be saved. She sacrificed her own life to save Chin. Abu wanted to help her and ordered her to climb onto his back, and then he was forced to drag her along with him. After all, she was to blame for what had happened. If she had been more careful, the doctor's death could have been avoided. Chin tried to break free and go back for the woman, but the boy held her tightly and wouldn't let go. Hai couldn't believe that this was the end, but he saw that the woman was not going to catch up with them. She understood that there was no point in doing so. Soon, she would also become a mutant because she was already infected. She only asked to protect Chin because she was their last hope. Hai promised to complete the mission and save his friends at any cost. Still, he understood that they had to run away. He left the girl to die and left himself. She could no longer be saved because the transformation process had begun. Her whole life flashed before her eyes. She remembered herself as a young girl, how she had tried to save little Chin back then. From childhood, she was special, and even then, doctors took notice of her. Now the mutants began to tear her apart. They tore her body to pieces. For some time, she remained alive and experienced terrible suffering. Her cries of pain echoed throughout the tunnel, and people heard them. She gave them precious time, which allowed them to escape. Now they were in place and had to enter the ventilation tunnel. Then they had to come to a small courtyard, from which there was an exit to the surface. Chin couldn't calm down and cried constantly. She regretted that the woman had died because of her and sacrificed her own life. In addition, she felt guilty about what had happened because she was the one who had delayed everyone. Abu tried to hold on and not get angry. But now they were in a very critical situation and were fighting for survival. Therefore, there was no time to cry. They had to run away because the mutants had started looking for them again. In addition, the man had also run out of ammunition and they were defenseless. Despite her tears, Abu picked her up and began to carry her. She continued to cry and couldn't calm down. But because of her screams and cries, the zombies could find them again. Behind him, the main character left a decoy. These were gas cylinders that would explode after a while. He hoped that the explosion would occur at the moment when there were many zombies nearby. All he had to do was wait. The smell of gas was noticeable in the room, and the mutants also smelled it. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Everything started burning, and many mutants were injured and caught fire. Hai saw the flames behind him and realized that his plan had worked. Besides, he knew that the zombies had already started catching up with them and were very close. The bodies of the zombies could block the narrow ventilation tunnel. There was a ladder at the top that would lead people to safety, and when they approached it, they saw a bright light. It was a sunset that Abu and Chin had never seen with their own eyes. They were amazed and couldn't believe their eyes that it could be so beautiful outside. This picture was very different from the empty sky he had seen recently, and he wanted to see it with his own eyes as soon as possible. The boy began to climb the mountain, but the ladder began to break under his hands. This would delay them again for some time. They had to climb very carefully so as not to fall down. But the mutants found them again, and were now preparing for a new attack. The girl saw that the mutants were climbing up again and starting to chase them. After all, the flames had almost died down and now nothing threatened them. The only hope was that the zombies would not be able to climb after them. But the ladder was in such poor condition that it could not support all the people at once. Abu understood that they had to climb as quickly as possible in order to distribute the weight. He also told the girl to hold on to him tighter so that they would not fall. And when everything was ready, he began to climb up to safety. The zombies were too close. Half of them were burned, but even that didn't stop them. Hai tried to get to the surface. But suddenly, he felt one of the mutants grab his leg. The man tried to fight back, but there were too many enemies. They wouldn't let him go. And there was a risk that Hai would not be able to hold on and would simply fall down. But he didn't want to delay them and convince them that he could handle it. However, Abu understood that the ladder would not hold for long. After all, he saw what terrible condition it was in. Suddenly, it began to collapse and fall apart. Hai ordered them to move up before everything collapsed with them. However, it was too late. After so many years, the metal had rusted badly. It could not withstand such weight, so the ladder broke into two pieces. Chin began to fall and felt that this was the end. But the hero did not lose hope and tried to save himself. He could not break the promise he had made with his father and had to save the girl's life at any cost. At the last moment, he tried to grab the intact end of the ladder, and yet he managed to do it. There was still hope, because it seemed that this part of the ladder was much stronger. There were less than 2 meters to the surface. But he couldn't leave his father behind, who was still below. He was lucky because the ladder hadn't completely detached from the wall. He remained above the mutants, who couldn't reach him. However, now the man realized that this was the end. The boy wanted Chin to climb to the surface and find something that could save her husband. but she was afraid and couldn't do it on her own. However, the ladder wouldn't hold for long, so they had to escape as quickly as possible. Hai ordered them to flee and promised to meet them in 3 days at the TV tower. If he didn't show up by then, it meant that Hai was already dead. However, the boy didn't want to leave him and promised to save him right away. Finally, he threw him the thing he always carried with him. It flew to the surface, and now the ladder was completely broken. In conclusion, he asked him to take care of the girl and protect her life, even at the cost of his own. People watched as Hai began to fall straight into the crowd of zombies. It meant certain death. Abu couldn't believe that everything had happened so quickly and unexpectedly. After all, they didn't even have time to say goodbye to him. And even though he wasn't his biological father, he always loved him, even more than other people. Now he realized that he had spent a lot of time with him, and he never appreciated what his father had actually done for him. He only heard his voice screaming in pain and suffering. Still, he decided to get to the surface. He let Chin go first. He helped open the heavy metal cage. Now they were temporarily safe as there seemed to be no mutants around. The girl started crying again, but he told her to shut up. He blamed himself for his death because he was the one who wanted to take this route. His father taught him everything he now knew. A long time ago, he taught him how to build a fire and showed him how it could be done without a lighter. Then he gave him a lighter that the boy could carry with him. It was very convenient, and with it, starting a fire was a very simple task. But that evening, he gave him something much more valuable. This thing could serve for many years and even save his life. It was always used by soldiers in particularly difficult conditions. The man told him about the known fuel and food supplies. And even then, he warned him that he might not be around, and the boy would be left alone. But at that time, he couldn't imagine that it could actually happen. And then, he couldn't even imagine that his father could really die and leave him alone. Now the boy realized that he really wasn't ready for his death. It happened at a moment when he least expected it. Chin felt guilty about his death. She tried to talk to him, but Abu didn't want to listen to her. Still, he understood that time could not be turned back, and now everything depended only on him. Therefore, he had to move on and find a safe place to wait out the night. He decided to return to the TV tower in 3 days, as they had agreed. But it was impossible to meet a living man there, because he had seen with his own eyes how he had died. The boy took the girl and pulled her along with him. He knew that his father was the strongest man he had ever known. Therefore, not wanting to dwell on his death, he decided to just move on. He promised to take care of her and heal her leg so that she could move and walk. The place where they now found themselves was much more dangerous than the underground tunnels. For the first time in her life, Chin saw the earth with her own eyes. It was impressive in size and, even in its current state, seemed to her to be the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Now she understood why people wanted so much to return to the surface. It was hard to imagine how beautiful the city had been before the disaster. Moreover, it was very quiet there, not at all like on the surface. There was a lot of everything in the city, but at the same time, it was very empty. The boy thought that there would also be a lot of mutants outside, but luckily, there were none. However, when it got dark, everything would change, because zombies hid from sunlight, which they were very afraid of. The girl felt that her leg was starting to hurt even more. They needed to find a safe place to rest and examine her injury. But suddenly, he heard strange sounds and couldn't understand where they were coming from. Then Chin noticed black rain clouds in the sky. This meant that a heavy downpour was about to begin. The black clouds were directly above them, which meant they needed to find shelter urgently. After all, the rainwater was contaminated, and they were in mortal danger. Suddenly, he felt the rain begin to fall. With each passing minute, it grew stronger, so the hero began to run. He had to cover his eyes, because if water got into them, it would be the end. Therefore, first he had to find any place to hide, and only then could he think about safety and look for something better. But Chin understood that the raindrops would definitely get into the boy's eyes. She tried to cover him, but it was useless. Then she decided to act more decisively and not let him get wet. Chin began to climb over his neck. She covered his face with her own dress to protect his eyes. Abu was embarrassed because he wasn't ready for this. The girl also blushed, but she understood that it was necessary. The boy tried to find a safe place, but everything around him was destroyed. However, the girl noticed a store right in front of her that seemed to be intact. So they decided to go there because the rain was not stopping. The boy stood by the metal door and tried to open it. After a while, he managed to do so. He opened the metal fence and began to look around the store to see if it was really safe there. There were a lot of mice in the store, but it was well preserved. In addition, in the darkness, he saw a silhouette and thought that someone might be there. But as it turned out, they were just mannequins. So that meant they were in a clothing store. And indeed, it was a store selling underwear and various costumes. In addition, it was much cleaner there than in other houses. There was only a thick layer of dust that could be wiped off. The girl wanted to find new clothes for herself because her dress was very wet and dirty. Abu tried to find water and medicine to examine her wounds. He managed to find plastic bottles in which he was going to collect rainwater. A lot of water was needed to wash her wound. In order to kill the bacteria in the water, he was going to build a fire. He needed to kill the bacteria that were in the water. The rain did not stop, and it would soon be dark. The girl tried to find clothes for herself, but there was nothing suitable there. Now she realized that it was actually a sex shop. Meanwhile, Abu was trying to find wood to build a fire, but there weren't many suitable items in the store either. At that moment, the girl didn't understand what he was trying to do, and Abu saw her in her new clothes. She was embarrassed by her appearance, but her old clothes were wet. It was the only normal thing she could find among all the things in the store. The dress was too short, but she had to wear it. It was the only thing she could wear. Besides, she had very long and strange socks. Her wound was very swollen and her leg began to hurt even more. Besides, it would soon get cold because night was approaching. Meanwhile, everything was ready to start boiling water. Abu managed to find a metal mesh and tried to boil all the water thoroughly. Luckily, the bottles were made of special plastic that could withstand heating well. Now everything was ready and he was able to get enough water. In addition, he wanted to taste it because he was very thirsty. It was scary to do, but he simply had no other choice. The boy was going to drink first and take a few sips. After a few minutes, he realized that the water was safe because nothing happened to him. Abu noticed that Chin was looking at him all the time and did not take her eyes off him. He felt sorry for her because, like him, she wanted to drink. He decided to share with her, even though he was still angry. There wasn't much water, but soon he would be able to purify some more, so he gave her the bottle. There was still a little left, just enough to wash the wound. The boy saw that her wound was very badly infected. First, it had to be cleaned and the pus removed, and only then could it be washed and bandaged. It was going to be very painful, so he asked her to be patient and wait a little. It was too painful, but she tried to endure the pain. Night fell, and now it was very dark around them. Kin was tired, so she fell asleep. The boy did everything he could. He washed the wound and bandaged her leg. The rain did not stop, and its drops fell right on her face. But then the hero realized that the legends were not lying, because Chin was not susceptible to the virus. All her life, her family and doctors had tried to protect her, and to do so, they had even sacrificed their own lives. Suddenly, he heard sounds that frightened him greatly. It was people shouting and starting to approach him. He realized that the flames he had not extinguished had revealed his location. He tried to put out the fire, realizing that this was his big mistake. The noise woke Chin. She couldn't understand what was happening and why he was so agitated. This frightened her very much, and then she realized that she was in danger. The boy explained that they had been found and he did not know who those people could be. At that moment, they watched as they began to approach the store. There were two of them, and it was clear that one of them had a serious injury. It was a woman and a man who were also trying to find shelter as night fell. His leg was injured, and they also saw flames and knew that there was definitely someone in the house. Suddenly, another shot. The arrow hit the woman's body and pierced her through. She felt intense pain and realized that this was the end. She began to bleed profusely, and she couldn't stop it. They were constantly being watched through the sights. Chin began to cry. She couldn't just watch what was happening and wanted to help. However, the boy wouldn't let her do it and kept her close to him. They couldn't go down and didn't want to risk their lives. After all, it was already impossible to save them. The woman was lying on the ground and dying. She asked her husband to help and save her. Hoping to stop the bleeding, he pressed down on the wound with all his strength. But he understood that it was all in vain and that it was already impossible to save her. And if he didn't leave now, then he would also be killed. He didn't want to die, so he started to run away and move towards the house. But suddenly another shot, the arrow hit him in the other leg. The man fell to the ground feeling intense pain. In pain, he began to scream and beg them not to kill him. Chin couldn't take it anymore. She broke free and was about to run away to try to save people. She couldn't just stand by and watch someone being killed. Abu couldn't take it. He was so angry that he was ready to hit her. It was dark outside, and the sniper who was shooting people would open fire immediately if he saw anyone. Most likely, he was a professional who had special equipment and shot silently. And it was obvious, he didn't kill the man just for the sake of it, but to lure them in. The sniper was watching them the whole time, and realized that the people had figured out his plan. He was very close and was indeed a professional. Abu understood that if she died, his father and the doctor's sacrifice would be in vain. Therefore, he could not allow this to happen and promised to protect her. He was ready to do anything to survive, even kill someone else. In addition, he noticed that his briefcase contained medicine and many other supplies. He begged to be saved and was willing to give everything to stay alive. His girlfriend was dying and bleeding to death. But suddenly, another danger appeared, much more terrifying than the sniper. They were zombies who had emerged from their hiding places just as night fell. They were hungry, so they moved toward the man and wanted to tear him to pieces. They could see well in the dark, and hearing his cries, immediately ran toward the wounded man. Now they began to attack him, and it became clear that there was no hope of escape. He died, and the mutants tore his body to pieces. In the darkness, only his loud cry echoed. Abu tried to calm the girl down and not make any noise, because he didn't want the mutants to get to them too. But suddenly he saw that something was wrong with her. She just fell to the ground and lay unconscious. The boy was very frightened because he thought she might have been injured. But her head hurt badly and she could no longer stand on her feet. Now Abu realized that the infection had penetrated her leg wound and caused an infection. She started bleeding heavily again. But Chin hoped that she would feel better after a good rest, because this happened to her quite often. She compared it to a cold and did not attach any serious importance to it. The boy understood that she urgently needed proper medicine to bring down her high fever. But he understood that the disease was developing very quickly, so he had to find a cure. The boy began to search, trying to find at least something in the house. The girl's life depended on him, so he had to do everything possible to save her. He knew that there was a pharmacy nearby where he could find medicine. He also remembered that the people had a backpack with a lot of supplies in it. Still, he decided to take a desperate step because he couldn't wait any longer. But before that, they needed to prepare and hope for luck. After all, the sniper who was hunting them could be sitting in the same place and waiting. Abu had to leave, but he promised to return after a while. The girl did not want to stay alone, because she was very afraid of the killers and mutants that were nearby. However, Abu had no choice and had to leave no matter what. He tried to calm her down and told her that he would return soon. If he didn't, she would soon develop blood poisoning and die. So he began to prepare, taking all the necessary equipment with him. He remembered his father's words and wanted him to take care of her and protect her. If he didn't do that, his father would never forgive him. He had already come up with a plan to outsmart the killer and defeat him. But now, the main thing was to protect himself from the mutants, of which there were many on the streets. He saw that the briefcase was lying in the middle of the road, which could be a good target for the killer. It was safer to wait until dawn to calmly collect the supplies. But he knew for sure that the sniper would also be waiting, so he needed to determine his exact location. It was obvious that he was on the roof of the neighboring building, and he had to somehow attract his attention. So he left the house and tried to hide behind the cars. The sniper who was constantly watching him was satisfied. He was waiting for the moment to take a shot and kill him. Abu started running and tried to find the nearest cover as quickly as possible. He stopped near a car parked on the road because he thought it was safe. There were a lot of mutants around him, so he tried not to make any noise and attract their attention. But they immediately heard a strange noise and were about to rush towards its source. Suddenly, strange sounds began to echo from a completely different place, and the mutants turned abruptly. They began to walk in circles, trying to figure out where the strange sounds were coming from. When they saw only stones on the ground, they realized that this was it. In this way, the boys managed to distract their attention and lead them as far away from themselves as possible. He continued to throw stones and gradually approached the briefcase. Abu tried to run quickly from cover to cover so as not to expose himself to danger. Now he knew exactly how to deceive the zombies and stay in a safe place. He continued to throw stones and tried to lead them as far away from himself as possible. Now that he had cleared the way, he had to try to steal the briefcase. It was right in front of him, but Abu did not rush. The boy did not forget about the sniper and the fact that he could be waiting for him to appear and was preparing to shoot. But suddenly, he saw two mutants in front of him, who were the last obstacle to the briefcase. He was very close, but he couldn't put himself in danger and take such a big risk. Besides, he would be in the sniper's line of sight, so the risk was too great. Killer saw that the main character was hiding behind broken cars and waited for him to appear. And suddenly he managed to see part of his head. He kept him in his sights and was ready to kill the main character at any moment. And when his head appeared even more, he fired a shot. His arrow began to fly straight toward its target. It seemed that now he would definitely be able to kill Abu. The arrow hit the target and pierced him right in the head. The sniper expected the boy to fall to the ground, but nothing happened. The head remained in place, even with the arrow stuck in it. Now he understood that it was just a decoy. The boy had made an improvised head out of mannequins that were in the store in order to trick him. Now Abu realized that this was a real professional who had good weapons and knew how to shoot. But that was all. This incident, he had another plan. Now he had to do everything possible to hide from him. And the boy began to remember what his own father had taught him. The sniper continued to watch him and saw that the main character had stopped moving. It seemed that he wanted to play with him, but suddenly, a bright flash appeared in the crosshairs. Then he saw a bottle of gasoline and realized that the guy wanted to start a fire. The bright mixture exploded and blinded the sniper, so he couldn't see anything for a while. Everything around him caught fire, and the flames were right in front of his briefcase. She separated the protagonist from the main character, so he took advantage of this moment to use the bag. Now that he had the briefcase, he was going to return. However, he needed to find gasoline, which could be found in cars. And while he was hiding behind them, he was able to get a few liters. First, he filled small bottles with gasoline, which he had hidden in his pocket. After that, he prepared some cloth and was about to set them on fire. It was a very effective weapon that could blind the enemy and create a lot of smoke. The sniper realized that he had underestimated him and fallen into a trap. Now he had lost sight of the boy again and could not see him in his sights. Suddenly he appeared. A shot rang out, but the arrow missed its target. Abu started to run away, but he knew the sniper was back in position and trying to hit him. As he ran, he totally forgot about the other danger waiting for him on all sides. It was the zombies who had come back and wanted to tear him to pieces. The boy tried to escape and dodge the attacks. There were too many mutants, so the way to the store was blocked. New mutants kept coming back, so he had to find another way. He had to run away and try to take the mutants as far away from the store as possible so as not to expose Chin to mortal danger. He couldn't go back either, because he would end up in the firing zone, so he had to keep moving forward. The mutants started running after him. The boy had no intention of stopping because he wanted to take them away from Chin. But these creatures were too fast and could move on all fours. He had never seen anything like this before, but he knew they would catch up with him soon. He tried with all his might to break away and find a safe place, but they didn't fall behind and continued to chase him. He moved past the wrecked cars but couldn't stop and hide in one of them. The doors and windows were broken, and besides, it would be easy for them to get to him there. Suddenly, he saw that the mutants were in front of him. There were so many of them that they began to climb out from all sides and chase him. The further he ran, the more new mutants appeared, responding to the noise he made. In addition, it was very dark outside and he couldn't see well. He risked being surrounded, so he needed to find a safe place to wait out the night. Abu stopped near an abandoned bus and tried to catch his breath. But the zombies began to surround him because they did not feel tired. The only option for salvation was to try to climb onto the bus and pray that they would not get him. But when he started to climb, one of the mutants grabbed him by the leg. He wouldn't let him climb higher and tried to pull him back to the ground, but Abu managed to fight him off. At the same time, he was grabbed by his briefcase. With incredible effort, he managed to break free and climb inside the bus. Suddenly, another monster grabbed his arm again and tried to bite him. Now the main character was in real danger, but he managed to break free again. He climbed inside the bus and saw many mutants surrounding him. He knew he had to hold out until dawn. But suddenly, he saw that the zombies were already inside and were looking for him. One of them was right under his seat and tried to bite his leg. Abu tried to hit it and kill it. He beat it with a heavy metal stick, and he kept doing it until he managed to fight it off. This caused a lot of noise, so new zombies began to approach the bus. They managed to get inside and broke the metal door. One of them tried to bite the main character, but the guy managed to undress and save his life. Now, the mutants took his jacket. But the main thing was that he had the briefcase, for which he had risked so much. Now the zombies began to get inside the bus. The hero understood that he needed to urgently come up with a new plan because he was doomed. Anya continued on the bus, and the mutants tried to catch up with him. The only way to salvation was up the mountain, so he tried to get out through the hatch. But it was closed, so he had to jump out the back window. However, there were already a lot of zombies there, and the boy found himself completely surrounded. They were hungry and started attacking him again. But at the last moment, he managed to climb up and get onto the roof of the bus. He hoped that it was a dangerous place where they couldn't reach him. After all, he had no other options for hiding and waiting it out. He knew that the mutants couldn't climb, so now he could rest easy. It seemed that he was finally out of danger, and now he had to wait until dawn. He began to examine the backpack to see what valuable items were inside. He was lucky to find medicines for various diseases and injuries. There were various pills, bandages, and preparations. In addition, he managed to find a bottle of drinking water, which he drank in one gulp. Moreover, there was food that could last a long time, so he also began to eat. The monsters continued to approach him and would not let him go, so he just had to wait. He hadn't eaten anything all day, so now he was going to replenish his energy. He tried to replenish his body with proteins, fats, and other vitamins. The pharmacy had antidepressants and energy bars, so he ate half of the supplies and left the rest for the girl. Now he was going to wait until dawn, until the mutants left his bus and he could escape. Abu felt very tired and began to fall asleep. But he understood that it was very dangerous and he had to hold out until dawn. But fatigue was stronger, and in the end, he fell asleep. The next morning, he felt a strange noise and touches on his body. After a while, he woke up from being awakened. He tried to understand what was happening, and suddenly he realized that he had fallen asleep and slept through most of the night. He didn't see his briefcase next to him and didn't understand what was happening. But suddenly, he saw a monkey on the roof of the bus holding his equipment. The monkey had stolen his personal belongings and started to run away. Well, the animal was very aggressive and had already eaten almost all of his food. Abu realized that he had made a terrible mistake. Now the animals had taken all of his belongings, which were so necessary for survival. All of his food, medicine, and water were gone. His briefcase was completely empty. In addition, he realized that the first aid kit, which was so necessary, was also gone. The monkeys began to scatter, holding his belongings in their hands. They could climb trees, so there was no way the boy could get them back. These were little monsters, because of which he lost everything he had risked so much for. But suddenly, one of the animals did not run away from him, but continued to sit right in front of him. This monkey was very small and did not know that you had to run away from people. Abu realized that this was his chance because the first aid kit was in its paws. Understanding his intentions, the monkey began to move away and was about to run away. The boy took out a knife and was going to get the medicine at any cost. Realizing the danger, the other animals began to scream, and immediately, without wasting any time, the boy rushed straight at him. It seemed that the monkey was already in his hands and that he was about to catch and kill her. But it wasn't as easy as it seemed. At the last moment, it managed to escape from him and save itself. The monkey started to run away, but suddenly a zombie hiding under the bus caught it and started pulling it towards him. The other animals started screaming because they realized that now they could lose their friend. They also knew that zombies were dangerous. The mutant started pulling the monkey towards him and was about to tear it to pieces. But suddenly, something sharp pierced his hand and prevented him from doing so. It was the main character who knew that he could be waiting for him under the bus, so now he tried to kill him. Because of this, he let go of the animal he was holding by the tail. His fingers spread. He tried to break free, but the guy pressed on him with his whole body and did not give him the opportunity to do so. He hit him in the back with his knee to prevent the mutant from biting him. He also pressed him with his other leg. The monster screamed and kept trying to free itself and bite the main character. The guy knew that the zombie could bite him, so he covered his mouth with a towel to feel safe. After that, he was ready to kill him, and began to stab him with a knife directly in the neck and head. The guy did this until the monster completely lost signs of life, and only then did he calm down and was ready to move on. He began to inspect the area around him, and he noticed that the monkey was nowhere to be found. He completely forgot about it and let it escape. However, he was glad that the monkey helped him find out where the zombie was hiding and that they allowed him to kill him. He was going to continue searching for her, but suddenly something flew into his face. She had a very unpleasant smell, and he didn't know what it really was. But at that very moment, he saw monkeys throwing themselves at him with it. However, he no longer had time to look for the first aid kit. He remembered the girl and that she needed his help. Therefore, he hurried home with all his might to catch up and save her. He saw that there were no more mutants and bodies of dead people left after last night on the street. And he guessed that something terrible had happened. Suddenly, he heard a terrible scream, and his guesses were confirmed. Meanwhile, unknown people had entered the store. One of them tried to hurt the girl and started tearing her clothes. She tried to defend herself, so Zara sawed his face and tried with all her might to escape. But it didn't help, because the man was much stronger than her and could easily win. She started crying. There were many scratches and bruises on her face. There were other people with him who were watching what he was doing. They said that he should hurry up because they had very little time and it was worth hurrying. However, she understood what they wanted to do with her. She tried to convince them that they should leave her or take her with them because she could be useful. However, when the man heard this, he only laughed. He didn't believe a word she said. He said that he had met a lot of such people on his way, who convinced him that they were very important. And they all died. He killed them and robbed them of all the property they had. However, he didn't notice at all how the main character was already nearby and watching his every step. He was preparing to strike and was just waiting for the right moment to do so. Suddenly, the fat man grabbed the girl again. He pressed her to the ground with his own weight and didn't give her the opportunity to move. At that moment, he began to take off his pants, and it was this that the guy took advantage of and approached him, putting a knife to his neck. He was ready to kill him, but he understood that after that, he would be shot. Seeing him, Chin was very happy and her hopes were renewed. The bandits were shocked by this turn of events and wanted to shoot him. So he had to take the man prisoner in order to have a chance to stay alive. The bandits began to mock him. They said that this man's life meant nothing at all, so it wouldn't help him at all. And they were ready to kill him along with him. And after a few minutes, they were preparing to shoot and kill him. The fat man tried to convince them that he could be valuable. But his decision could no longer be changed, and he ordered to open fire. Everyone looked at him in surprise because they did not expect him to be willing to sacrifice his ally. The girl only managed to hear the voice of the main character, who ordered her to bend down. And at that moment, a shot rang out. The bullet hit him right in the head. He killed his comrade, but Abu managed to grab the girl and remain alive and unharmed. His body was lying on the ground and blood was flowing from his head. The leader of the bandits insisted that he did this because he simply could not let the main character escape. In addition, he said that they no longer needed him, and now the most important task was to prevent the guy from leaving. He and the girl could become prisoners for them, so they had to be caught. The guy managed to escape to the basement, so the bandit opened fire, trying to wound him. However, Abu again managed to get out of the line of attack and stay alive. To catch up with him, the bandits began to go down and were already looking for him. The girl screamed in fright and asked him to hurry up because they were right next to her. At this moment, a gunshot rang out again. Abu was able to duck and only heard the bullet fly over his head. He had already managed to run out into the street, and he was holding his girlfriend in his arms. But running out of the store, he noticed that someone was standing on the street. An unknown person in a suit ordered him to keep quiet and behave quietly. It seemed that this was his plan. The bandits, who did not even suspect anything, were going to go out into the street to pursue him. They did not even notice the unknown man in a suit who was watching them, preparing to strike. And the one who came out first was the least lucky. He was stabbed in the throat with a knife, causing a fatal wound. It became clear that the unknown man was a true professional in his business. And in fact, his goal was also to take the girl, so for this, he was ready for this step. Only now did the bandits realize that there was someone else outside, who had also opened a hunt for them. And now he had a gun, so they had to be very careful. After a while, the sounds of shots were heard. The man in a suit tried to injure those who were inside. They realized that another of their comrades had been killed, and now the enemy was using his gun. The leader began negotiations with the unknown, trying to find out who he really was and what goal he was pursuing. And he only replied that this information was of no use to them and he was not going to tell them anything. He advised them not to go out because he would be forced to open fire again and kill them all. In addition, he was going to lock them in the store, so he began to lower the metal door. He also replied that he did not want to let them kill the children, who were very weak. Therefore, he offered to leave them because only in this case could he let them go. As it turned out, the leaders had a special task. They were supposed to find this girl. One of them tried to approach the door, but suddenly shots rang out again, piercing the metal fence. The bullets hit him right in the arm and he fell to the ground, suffering from terrible pain. Immediately, a stranger's voice was heard, warning them not to come closer, because otherwise he would have no choice and would be forced to kill them. The leader of the bandits began to understand that the situation was very difficult. If he didn't find the girl right away, he would be in big trouble, and he himself could die at the hands of his boss. Therefore, he urgently needed to come up with something, and began to climb to the second floor. From there, he hoped to get his enemies who could be hiding below. All this time, he shouted and threatened them, but when he got up, he realized that there was no one there anymore. Meanwhile, his wounded ally was trying to stop the bleeding. He also understood that they could not waste time and sit still, so he opened the metal door in order to go outside. But he did not hear the voice of his leader, who ordered him not to open the door, but to stay inside. He simply did not think that the sounds of the shots could have caused zombies to run, who now surrounded the store and did not give them a chance to get out. This allowed the main character and his new acquaintance to break away from them. The mutants helped them a lot because they were able to delay the pursuit, and now, for some time, they could be safe. But it was very strange that the zombies dared to go out when it was daytime and still light outside. During the day, they usually slept because they did not like bright sunlight, but the sounds of the shots were very loud. Therefore, this was what provoked them to go out. The unknown told about the fact that he suspected something suspicious, and therefore went to the store as soon as the sun rose. Unfortunately, he was not mistaken and arrived just in time because he was able to save them. Just now, they were cleaning through a huge number of fences that were built by people who were trying to survive on the surface. Abu, for the first time in all his time, dared to ask who he really was. And at this moment, the man turned to him and was about to take off his mask. He replied that his name was Tengu B, and he replied that just now, they were moving in the direction of the house where he lived. After a while, they had already arrived at the place. The plot of land where he lived was very high, so you could say that it was well protected. He reached the only place in the garden that was not locked in the alley, and it was there that he could go inside. The door was locked, so the mutants simply could not open it, and it was very safe. And when the door opened, Tengu B motioned for them to enter and waved his hand to invite them to do so. It was very beautiful inside, and the heroes were enchanted by the beauty. After all, it was a closed courtyard, in which there were many different plants and flowers, which were incredibly beautiful. They had never seen this in their lives, because they spent all their time in the sewers and the subway. There were a lot of paintings hanging on the walls. These were his joint photos with various celebrities. In addition, the man had a lot of trophies and awards from various festivals. These were things that he valued very much in the past and worked hard to achieve such results. But now, it no longer mattered. He remained a movie star only in the past, and no one noticed it anymore. But when the girl found out about him, she was delighted, and she wanted him to tell her more about himself. His house was very large. On such an area, many more people could live at the same time. However, now it was necessary to examine the girl and help her, stop the bleeding and treat the wounds. For this case, he also had everything he needed. Over the years, he managed to find many medicines for most diseases, so they were very lucky to end up in his house. The girl started to have a fever, so he mixed a lot of water and medicine to drink. She did not want to, but the guy also understood that it was necessary. Therefore, he made her eat the pills that would be necessary for her to recover. He also made her drink a lot of fluids to bring down her fever. The man had a lot of antibiotics, so his girlfriend was the one who could drink. However, they did not understand where he managed to find so many medicines if he lived here all alone. Chin did not like that he suspected him, because if it were not for this man, they would both be dead. But he calmed her down and asked her to relax because she needed rest and sleep. The girl simply did not like that he considered everyone around him to be enemies and bad. They continued to argue and did not even notice how the stranger disappeared. However, they did not even guess what terrible things he was doing at that moment. He cut up human bodies and sang at that moment. Because it was his favorite part of the job, the one he truly enjoyed. The girl had a dream when there were a lot of people on the street, and at that moment, a serious downpour began. All the people immediately received very serious burns and suffered from severe pain. Their eyes began to hurt, and it seemed like they were going to burst. At that moment, flowers began to grow from their eyes, which did not stop and only became bigger with every second. It caused great pain, and people screamed, trying to stop. But those who fell under the rain were doomed and could not be saved. Suddenly, Chin woke up and realized that it was actually just a dream. The main character sat next to her all the time and made sure that she felt normal and the fever passed. At this moment, a man approached them and was overjoyed to see that she was feeling much better. He apologized for being away for so long, but he decided to clean a separate room for them so that they could feel much more comfortable. But the main character noticed that he had brought a huge suitcase with him, so it seemed very suspicious to him. However, the stranger replied that in fact, there were a lot of fresh vegetables in it that he had collected from his own garden. He began to explain that there was a huge greenhouse on his roof, where there were a lot of different plants. And that was how he managed to get the medicine that he now used to treat other people. After these words, the boy began to believe the man and was convinced that his intentions were really good and he wanted to help. He even asked how he could thank him and was ready to do anything he asked. However, he replied that for some time the deceased was going to leave him in charge, so he asked him to look after the garden and the house. But before that, he gave him a small tour. He showed him a huge number of different plants, which were very many in his greenhouse. He had never seen such a huge variety of plants before. He had never seen most of them and did not even know what they were for. All this impressed him very much. Moreover, he concluded that he had encountered this before. Another man also worked in the garden, who made sure that the plants were clean and not infected. This was necessary so that the grown vegetables could be eaten and sold to other people. There were many buyers for such goods. And it was at this moment that he remembered how he, with his friends, were willing to pay a lot for potatoes. That very day, they were going to exchange all their cartridges for a bag of potatoes. However, he did not understand its true value and why the price was so high. Then he tried to dissuade Wang Shu and asked her not to do it. But she simply did not listen to him and insisted that it was really very necessary for them. However, she wanted to make them try the potatoes, because they would regret it if they didn't eat it. So she took this step and was going to buy absolutely everything so that they could taste this food. Then, she showed how to cook it, but first they had to peel it. Then, you have to add some spices and turn it into mashed potatoes. It was her special recipe, and after a while, everything was ready. The team eagerly started eating what she had prepared, but none of them even expected that it could be so delicious. This dish was so delicious that it seemed like it was from their childhood. And they even asked for more because it was really very, very delicious. However, it was necessary to save money, so she refused them this. But nevertheless, she made concessions, and allowed the main character to eat at least one spoonful. He was scared, but it was so tasty that he simply could not refuse. The guy could not even believe that he was immediately against it and was not going to buy potatoes. But now he finally understood that it was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten in his life. Then they even wanted to start their own production and learn how to grow potatoes. He began to remember that only a few people knew about the exit to the surface at the end of the tunnel. Therefore, most likely Wang Shu could escape through it. He was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice that he had pulled out one of the potatoes right from the roots. And when he saw the plant, he remembered that it was exactly the same one that he had once had to eat. But he wanted to hide the traces of his crime, so he began to dig a hole, to plant it back and not give himself away. About how, when the boy began to dig deeper, he realized that he had found something strange. There were some very strange things in the ground that reminded him of bones. And when he began to look closer, he no longer had any doubts that the bones belonged to people. Before the man left, he tried to stop him. However, it was too late. The stranger was already too far away. He came to a place where he constantly brought human bodies. There lived a terrible monster, whom he constantly fed and tried to find new human bodies for him. But now, it became known that he had no more supplies left and the last living person died because he was sick. And he began to talk about new guests who were just now in his house and were an ideal option for them to be cooked. Therefore, he hoped that the monster would like this option and he would be able to comfort him. He also began to talk about the girl whom he was going to kill later, in order to stretch more food for the monster. And when the zombie heard about this, he started screaming. As it turned out, the man was holding him on a chain, and monster almost escaped from the basement and bit him right on the neck. But he was lucky to dodge and jump back. So he picked up the stick, which he used to calm the mutant. He hit her in the face with all his strength in order to drive her back into the tunnel. As it turned out, this monster was his ex-wife, whom he was trying to calm down in this way. After all, he was convinced that he looked after her in this way, and that she was alive only thanks to his care. The man wanted her to just obey him, and hoped that someday he would be able to find a medicine that would help her turn into a normal person. From such a strong blow, his cigarette broke, and a new wound appeared on the woman's body. But this was able to calm her down, and she no longer behaved as aggressively as before. Therefore, he even dared to approach her and tried to touch her head. She was calm, and therefore, she was no longer going to attack him, but simply sat in a dark tunnel, allowing herself to be stroked and touched. The man replied that he was not going to kill the girl because so far, he even liked her. But when he gets tired of this, he will kill her. Meanwhile, Abu continued to dig and was able to find a lot of human bones in the ground, which belonged to many people. At that moment, he realized that Tengubi might not actually be who he claimed to be, and he began to remember his strange behavior and the suspicions he had aroused in him by doing so. And he began to understand that it was not very far from this place to the store, which was why the man had so easily managed to find him and bring him here. Therefore, most likely he was a liar, and it was Tengubi who could be the sniper who opened the hunt for them last night. And now he realized that he had made a mistake, because he himself had come to the lair of the one who had hunted him and tried to kill him. Suddenly, the main character realized that his legs were weak, and he, in fact, felt very bad. But he did not understand what was really happening to him and why it happened. But he began to guess that perhaps it was because of the medicine that the man had given him. And now he realized that he was stupid, and that he and the girl could be deceived. At that moment, everything in his eyes began to blur a lot, and he could no longer stand straight on his feet. However, he simply could not give up, and understood that he should pull himself together and move on. He could not fall asleep even now when he had to take care of himself and his girlfriend, because their lives depended only on him. Otherwise, he understood that he risked death and went to fertilizer for plants just like other people who once believed him. At this time, the evil owner of the house began to return home. He did not suspect anything and sang all the time, so he began to open the door. Having entered the house, he was going to kill the boy and use his body to feed him to his wife. Therefore, calmly, and as if nothing had happened when he entered, he locked the door behind him, and having entered, he addressed them by name, because he wanted to check if they were still conscious, or if they had already fallen asleep from his devices. He also understood that the people had not eaten anything since they had entered his house, so they were really hungry and he needed to feed them. But suddenly he noticed that something was wrong. He heard a strange sound in his house and realized that it was coming from the kitchen, so most likely the drugs were working. Tengubi started to get up to check what was really going on there. He thought he would find the guy in the kitchen and expected to see him unconscious there. He should be lying on the ground. But the sound was only getting louder, and he now definitely understood that in fact, there was something wrong with the guy. It looked like he was just throwing up. He couldn't open the door the first time, and he realized that it was actually locked, but he had the keys. Tengubi thought that the guy might have guessed his plan, and therefore he carefully and very slowly began to open the door. Entering inside, he saw the main character in front of him and was going to explain everything to him. But he did not expect to see that Abu had not lost consciousness, but on the contrary, to wait for him. In his hands was a pot of hot water, and at that very moment, he was ready to strike and take revenge on the enemy for what he was going to do to them. The guy got ready and was going to pour hot water directly on his face. At the same time, he shouted at the man that he was a traitor. Abu wanted the water to hit his eyes and blind the man, but at the last moment, he managed to cover his face with his hand, so his eyes remained intact. Taking advantage of this, he pushed and threw him to the ground, and he himself was going to run away from his house. Tengubi could not come to his senses for a long time and understand what had happened to him. His face and hand were burned and hurt very much. Tangubi did not understand why the guy did not lose consciousness, because the dose was enough for him to fall asleep. In addition, he was angry with him for trying to ambush him and attack him at such an unexpected moment. So now he was going to take revenge on whom and find the guy to kill him and the girl. But when he tried to open the door, he realized that the hero had locked him inside. He managed to block the door from the other side with a chair,